Good morning, Trinity Baptist Church. Today we're going to read a short passage from Matthew and a long commentary on that passage from Luther, which is not to say that the Luther is more important than the Scripture, just that we can get a lot out of a little bit of God's rich, rich word. Luther says we should read Matthew 22:39, where Jesus tells the Pharisees that the second great commandment is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. For Luther, that becomes a rubric for when we should act and not act and what we should do in times of, in his case, plague. And he goes on for a couple paragraphs here, but they're so applicable that I'm just going to read the whole thing, these two paragraphs, and let you decide whether this is a good interpretation of Matthew 22:39, love your neighbor as yourself, for COVID-19 as he thought it was for, the plague in his time. This is what Luther says. He says, some disdain the use of medicines. They don't avoid places and persons infected by the plague, but lightheartedly make sport of it and wish to prove how independent they are. They say that it is God's punishment. If he wants to protect them, he can do so without our medicines or our carefulness. That is not trusting God, but tempting him. God has created medicines and provided us with intelligence to guard and take good care of the body so that we can live in good health. If one makes no use of intelligence or medicine when he could do so without detriment to his neighbor, such a person injures his body and must beware lest he become a suicide in God's eyes. By the same reasoning, a person might forego eating and drinking, clothing and shelter, and boldly proclaim his faith that if God wanted to preserve him from starvation and cold, he could do so without food and clothing. Actually, that would be suicide. It is even more shameful for a person to pay no heed to his own body and to fail to protect it against the plague the best he is able, and then to infect and poison others who might have remained alive if he had taken care of his body as he should have. He is thus responsible before God for his neighbor's death and is a murderer many times over. Indeed, such people behave as though a house were burning in the city and nobody were trying to put the fire out. Instead, they give leeway to the flames so that the whole city is consumed, saying that if God so willed, he could save the city without water to quench the fire. No, my dear friends, that is not good. Use medicine, take potions which can help you, fumigate house, yard, and street, shun persons and places wherever your neighbor does not need your presence or has recovered, and act like a man who wants to help put out the burning city. What else is the epidemic but a fire, which instead of consuming wood and straw, devours life and body? You ought to think this way. Very well. By God's decree, the enemy has sent us poison and deadly offal. Therefore, I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed, in order not to become contaminated and thus perchance infect and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me, and I've done what he's expected of me, and so I am not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely, as stated above. See, this is such a God-fearing faith, because it is neither brash nor foolhardy, and does not tempt God. I think Luther is perhaps reading this well, certainly for his time and maybe for ours. It's striking to me how applicable it is, that whether or not this is a good interpretation of Matthew 22, and I think it is a good one, he's certainly talking about the exact same kinds of issues and questions that we are talking about today. And I would encourage you more than anything to go to Scripture, go to Scripture, go to Scripture, not least of which, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, and figure out how we can do exactly that right here and right now.